Grand Rising. Why something's been done wrong and stupid. ARC. True Brit News. Part of what I am doing, or part of this post, I did have a clear vision. Okay, the title of it is going to be, it's UNDRIP and possibly GESARA NESARA is what is being avoided worldwide, but is happening at the same time. As usual, even though I say I don't want to provide any evidence for the things that I might be saying, because some of it seems so obvious to me, and the reason why the world seems to be hurtling towards self-destruction is because, a bit like the Epstein files provides the rationale, if you like, or the reason why UNDRIP, GESARA NESARA law needs to be established, or re-established actually, in many ways, because it's the way that the world was before, I don't know, a unipolar world, a one world order, which is based upon things like acceptance of the LGBTQ MAP agenda, and it's also part of things like the green agenda, and also gives rise to, or gives a comprehension of why it is we have the issues around immigration, migration that we are experiencing here, particularly in the UK, but it's actually no different to what's been going on in the US. It's exactly the same. It's a mirror copy in many respects, but on a much smaller scale. And I might talk about that just for a little bit, just to get me into the groove of why it is that I might be saying it is UNDRIP and GESARA NESARA that is being avoided, particularly by the West. I'm going to say Western Europe, actually, to be specific, because it seems as though the Americas have gone and are going a completely different route. They are not playing and not pandering to that agenda, that imperialist agenda that's been running for, I don't know, you could say 600 years on the one hand, definitely since the end of the Second World War, but the Second World War itself was part of that agenda. It's a continuation, it's just a reforming of that imperialist agenda. The idea that there's only there needs to be a one world order, and it needs to be the order as set out by what we would now call, or the instigators of the agenda, that agenda, as Ashkenazi Zionist pretend Jews. The pretend Jews is to illustrate that, or to emphasize the point that the people that are claiming to be Jews are not Jews. And again, there's a plethora of information, knowledge, research-based evidence that confirms that fact, that the people that are living in Israel now, the ones that we see on TV, that is not the place of their origin. I'm walking uphill, and it's actually a bit warmer than I thought it would be. So, and I'm mentioning that, I've just mentioned what it is I've just mentioned. Pause a second. No, I'm not. Because, in my view, and from my experience actually, I anticipated that what is happening now, and I don't know whether we've reached the peak yet. I don't think we have. Should have happened at least 3 years ago for me. 3 years ago? Yeah, 2023. At the latest, we should be where we are now, back then, in 2023. But what we saw, what I've observed, is an increase in those things that now, if you like, threaten the world. In terms of, you know, there's an ongoing war, there's economic crisis, that everyone actually, except those in the UK, it seems, although what we're being told by Starmer this very morning, that we're ahead of the curve in terms of impacts. We're prepared for the impacts of a global crisis. Because of what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz and in the Middle East more widely, and around the world wider than that still. So as the time's gone by, when that has led to the crisis that we're in, and I believe that this, as I say, this crisis is about avoiding. One of the things that it talks about in the GESARA and NESARA Law is a return to common law. It's one of the things that it talks about. It talks about the release of over 6,000 patented technologies that are going to be put out, you know, made available to everybody, all countries of the world, and not just to be held in the hands of those people that took out the patents and what it is that they've patented in the process, which is another podcast for another day, really. That whole issue about patenting and what's been patented, and why we have patents for technologies that people claim that they've invented and they didn't. So, and I think that's part of the reasons why GESARA and NESARA has been avoided. It's been actively worked against in many respects, because the people that own the patents, if the patents become available to everybody, all countries, then that reduces the opportunity for what's the word I'm looking for monopolies to exist, and for people to use those monopolies to control whole countries real or imagined, that is, because a lot of the countries that we know of today were created after the Second World War. The whole of the Middle East essentially has been created since the Second World War. So, you know, if you listen carefully to what Donald Trump has been saying, alongside or behind or before the insults come, there may be insults, but they are also facts. I think they're only insulting if the cap fits, bitch, wear it. And I think that's where we are in the UK. We're trying to brush off and forget that basically Donald Trump has called out Britain, the UK in particular. Well, he's called out the UK and the EU, called them cowards. You know, didn't come to his aid when he asked for it. I'm not saying he's right or he's wrong, and I'm not saying it's real or not, but I'm saying this is what he's saying as justification for his actions, and talking about the UK in the way that he has done. Called them cowards, and now he's said last night, and he said he's not going to forget what the lack of support that he got. And I can see what he means. You know, UK's been giving it the big one, and when push came to shove, you weren't there. And then it turns out that even if you did want to be there, you couldn't have been there. So you've got no shit, you've got no arms, you've got no boats, got no army, and now you're busy trying to recruit for an army, but it's not an army for the purposes that you were called up for by Trump. It's completely different reasons. I haven't done one of these videos in a while actually, so I'm just noticing how out of routine I have come talking and walking at the same time. So Trump's called the UK and the EU cowards. This morning or yesterday he said, because you've been cowards, didn't come when I called you, and then tried to jump in on getting on the act when the job's done, and then say that you're not for the war when you started the fucking thing in the first place. You know, I don't know, they've got the brass neckness, the UK in particular, to say, I'm trying to cross the road here, to say, you know, we're not part of this war. We're very much like Italy, when actually, if you remember what Trump said about, you know, the Iranian regime has been around for 47 years. So you have to acknowledge and look at who set Iran up, because Iran wasn't there, and it was set up by the British. Again, back in 1947, and in the same way they set up all the other shit. They set up Pakistan, set up India, set up Nigeria. Afterwards, a lot of the countries already in Africa had already been set up. After the Berlin Conference in 1918. So, what we're looking at, what I'm looking at, is the truth not being told about the situation that we're in. Why it is that people are trying to avoid dealing with GESARA and NESARA, return to common law, and also, I think GESARA and NESARA exists, in my view. I've come to comprehend possibly that GESARA and NESARA law has been created to avoid UNDRIP, because UNDRIP, you've got to go back to the indigenous and aboriginal of the planet for stewardship, custodianship. And that's what UNDRIP is suggesting. It's suggesting it's the handover of the rules of the lands, of the people on those lands, in return, and take stewardship, ownership. Can't really own the land, but it's the land of their forefathers. It's the place where their ancestors were, some buried, some slaughtered. This is the land of my forefathers. It's not the land of the people who claim to be English, white Anglo-Saxon, Protestants, because most of you weren't here when my mum arrived here in 1953. There were hardly any English. There's nothing really that you could say that were English people. Even though the English did exist, they were, probably ruling elite. Everybody else has come in since then. All the Italians that have settled, that were imprisoned in prison of war camps, the Polish that were in prison of war camps, all across these islands were released, and they became not just citizens, they became English, and they became English through the church. The Anglican Church in particular, which is a breakaway from Rome. So that's why the UK exists as a rogue nation, but actually as a rogue from Rome, but actually still controlled by Rome. That's the impression that's been given, because it's run by people who are neither English or British, and have no allegiance to the British, to the English, to people that are considering themselves dwellers on the island of Albion. We've got no commitment to it at all. If they did, two things wouldn't have happened. One, they wouldn't have done what it is that they've done, which is basically sold the shit off and all its resources, and that's why we're struggling. They haven't got their oil. They sold it. Sold the rights to extract the oil. Meanwhile, they use our taxpayers' money to buy oil from Arab states when we've got our own. We've got our own oil up there in the North Sea. But we've got other companies to come in. Sold it off under Margaret Thatcher. So that's when the sell-off started to happen. And now that you'll see that slowly they're bringing it back. They're bringing back, they're talking about it and running it alongside these windmills, renewables, solar power, and they're going to start talking about, we do it as an interim measure, you know what I mean, just to get us over the hump, and then still pursue the green agenda. The green agenda is bogus. It's another way of keeping the people that dwell on these islands, the people that are committed to Britain, and Britons, the indigenous and aboriginal inheritors to this land, from living their best life. They've been living it, and this is the way that they've been living it. And the way that they've been living it is, as an example, is how the activities that are highlighted in the Epstein files. Simple as. And then you can slap on top of that the war in the Middle East, war in Sudan, because these people don't have, particularly in Sudan, they have no guns, they haven't got no uniform, they haven't got no tanks. They're all built by the West. I mean, some of this stuff is so obvious, it's ridiculous, but we've chosen to ignore it. Which brings me nicely on to just to sort of say that I've completed the third podcast of, or recording rather, of Unhinged Psychotherapy Unhinged. And I'm pleased with that one, because it talks about some of these things, but from a ERP point of view, and what it is, you know, the process of moving on and letting go of the shit that we've been living, at least the last 5 years, but actually for the last 47 years, the last 250 years, because there's a 250-year anniversary of America allegedly getting its independence from Britain, which they've never gotten. The Commonwealth, including America, up until Trump got in, was being run out of Chatham House. You'll see, and I might put a link up to, Prometheus, is it Prometheus News or something, where she explains it very, very well. She's been tracking the movements of the British Empire and how it's been controlling economics and religion, but primarily economics, since the Second World War, but really in gear since 1973, when they, or the 1970s, when Britain came off the silver standard, when the sterling silver was the the reserve currency for the empire, and then they moved it over to the dollar. Yeah, the pound was a reserve currency, but it was backed by silver and gold. That stopped happening, and it was replaced with the dollar being the reserve currency that was backed by oil. So if you remember, and they're talking about the same sorts of things now, actually, there was a crisis, oil crisis in 1973, and you know how I know? Because I was in it. I had to spend an extra week in Jamaica because we couldn't come back because there was no fuel for the plane. They were rationing fuel. We were rationing a lot of things. We were on a 3-day week. So I'm going to cross this thing out. They were switching the lights off at whatever time of an evening. We were coming home, going to school in the dark, coming home in the dark. You know, candlelight. I think there was a 3-day week as well. There was a 3-day week as well. And that was in the 70s. What we are entering into potentially is something far, far worse. And in some ways, the only people that can stop it are the indigenous and aboriginal people who need to call these bitches to account. And what we're seeing with America is America's pulling away from that old world order by making America self-reliant. If you listen to what he's saying, is that he will say that we've got plenty of oil, and they do. You just nicked Venezuelan oil, but people are jumping up and down about Venezuela. But you have to remember, again, Venezuela didn't exist. You know, it's a recent creation, is Venezuela. Again, created by the West, and probably by Britain actually, but under with support from Spain and Italy primarily, and France. Okay, so what he's doing, he's saying basically, I'm not interested in the continent of Europe, I'm only interested in reunifying the continent of America, and and part of that continent, in that continent rather, is Greenland and Canada. Yeah, okay. So from the Arctic to the Antarctic to the tip of I think it's Argentina, that all of that is the American continent. All of that is America. It was all one place till the Europeans. When I say Europeans, I'm talking about both black and white, but the Caucasian Europeans in particular have been chief in establishing and ensuring that the Americas have got carved up into what it is carved up into today. So the creation of Canada again, the creation of Mexico, you know, these are European terms created by a conquering empire. You know, he who wins the war writes the rules. They tell the story, they tell the narrative of how the war was won. And because they've won it, or they won it, we've had 600 years. And again, since at least the Second World